Anybody?
I'm
Everybody's
new.
old.
My name's
Josh, you're new.
Yep.
Hit
I'm
us,
with
Josh.
Brian Becker. He's our new lead pastor. We're in Folsom, California at Lakeside Church. And he invited
Oh
me to
my
this.
gosh.
And I
Let's
don't really
pause
know
and pray
why.
for Josh
So
right
I'm
now. Let's pause and pray. Pause and pray.
just
Josh, welcome. Becker, you just did a transition yesterday or 2 days ago. Tell us in 30 seconds about it.
Yeah, Brad Franklin was the lead pastor, founding pastor here for 36 years. And so the big debate is who's the idiot that's going to replace him and be the guy.
You're it. You're it.
But the transition's gone great. He did everything he possibly could to make sure that this was a healthy transition. And we believe that every once in a while, there's a Steve Young after a Joe Montana.
Man.
There's a Zach Wilson after an Aaron Rodgers. Oh, no, that's not going to work.
Love it.
No, who do you got, Brian? You got, what's his face? Gino.
Just to know, the Seahawks just are putting everybody to sleep right now, but we're going to pounce. So get ready.
Go Rams.
But yeah, it's going great. But we're in the honeymoon.
Becker, I'm going to mute you real quick, Becker.
There you go. But yeah, that's it. And we are 3 days in or 4 days in to that transition. And but it's going good. All 4 days. Crushing.
Brian, I'm going to be in Detroit this weekend, and I just got tickets to the game.
Hey, I got a jersey, bro. We can work this out.
Hey, overnight it, man. I'll wear it.
Oh my gosh, here we go. All right. So you guys seriously pray for Brian and that transition. If you follow him on Instagram, you'll see some of that. And we'll pray for Josh as he's alongside. That's a huge role, Josh. So all seriousness, like just to continue to make that partnership work, and that all that is a big deal. And I'm going to come up and hang out with you guys in a week or so. So it'll be cool. Kay, you want to talk about the think tank? There's still a few holdouts on the call.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a great group of people, and as well as speakers. Rusty, Mark, Shane, Lance will all be there. It's going to be a great hang. There's a great dinner that you don't want to miss, that first dinner, as well as Top Golf and a replenishment day. So made it as cheap as possible so that everybody can come. And so please, if you haven't registered, man, we've got really, we're coming down to the wire as far as the spots and stuff. So we would like to prioritize that for you guys. So yeah, we'd love to have you guys there.
And if you have registered, you should have received an email yesterday, I believe, from Kay. If you didn't, throw a note in the chat, don't unmute, because it had some important details that if somehow we missed you as far as like confirming for the golf, and if you're bringing a +1, all of those things. So if you've registered for Think Tank live in Vegas and you didn't get the email, just put a note in the chat and we'll make sure that you get it, or check your junk mail because it may have gone there. All right. Cool. So we're going to cover like a whole ton of ground today. So we're going to just like, seriously, like we've got 3 different kind of sections, and we do this once in a while on the call. So those of you that have been on here for a while, you realize, and we do it partly because we want you to hear from different voices, and partly because we know that all of you are going to take certain things from each part of our conversation. We're going to give the bulk, over half of our time, to Mark, and we'll introduce him to those of you who don't know Mark here in a few minutes. But we're going to kick off. Kay's going to give you a little. Kay and I have both had some personal things that happened. Don't worry, it's not like terrible. We're not confessing today, but some personal experiences this last week that we thought were appropriate to sort of share with the entire group here in our Growmentum network, and to let you guys know, and some learnings from those things. So I'm going to throw it to Kay to kick it off. We're going to do personal practice with Kay. I'm going to dissect a disaster, and then Mark's really going to lean into a deep dive around how he leads his team and culture in a attitude of working on it, regular rhythms of that, and how we do that down through our volunteer team. So I'm going to hand it off to Kay, and Kay's going to take us on a road trip.
Yeah, so about 4 months ago, on the Think Tank live call, and you can watch that if you missed that. In May 2023, we talked about personal work on it time, like leaving burnout behind, and we talked a lot about some different exercises, some things, especially going into the summertime, to be able to make sure that you're carving out time to be able to take care of yourself and breathe and dream and all those things. And so, just two quotes that actually Lee shared during that time was this: the private place, anytime that you see life flourishing, it's because it is receiving nourishment outside of itself. It's a John Ortberg quote. I love that quote. As well as private space. What the private space does is that everything you need to have or to be in the public space will be given to you in the private space. I mean, let's look at even Jesus, right? And so this is so important for us to work on it even individually, as well as work on it organizationally, that we'll be even talking about today and as we talk about a lot. And so with that, basically what I wanted to do is I wanted to personally take a little bit of time to get away. I wanted to take 2 days away where I would be able to just write, think, dream, and just rest. And so my wife and my family was very gracious to be able to give me 2 days. And I was really brainstorming, like literally, like, you know, because of the relationships and people connections and all that stuff, you know, like I'm sure you have connections of people who have a beach house or a lake house or a cabin in the mountains or Airbnb something. And so, and oh, and there's actually some pastorstays.com. That might be something to look into, right, Lee? Something that you guys might want to actually write down because it's providing pastoral stays at these great places, Airbnb, just paying the cleaning fee. Anyway, all that to say, I was looking at all of these opportunities and said, man, I would love to, you know, have one of these nature spots. And I just decided, you know what? I'm going to take a train ride and I'm going to go from LA to Seattle and go on this coastal sleeper train and get a private room by myself to write, dream, think, sleep. There's dining cars, there's food is all provided, my own private room where I can do those things. And it was an amazing time. I just did that on Friday and Saturday. But before I went, I literally texted close friends and some trusted friends. And I said, hey, I'm spending some time away. Do you mind answering these questions for me? Hey, what do you think my greatest strength is? Where would you say there's areas that I need to grow the most? From a vocational perspective, do you think that I'm functioning in my sweet spot? And what adjustments do you think I need to operate more in my sweet spot? What concerns do you have of me and my future? And then as you think about my life and my future, what would you say to me? And this was just such a great exercise to be able to have this information, to be able to use as a processing or reflecting, a dreaming about what the future looked like. And so literally as I did that, I went from LA all the way up to Washington. And man, the scenery, what I didn't realize what God was going to do is actually give me the beach and the river and the mountain and the oceans. Like literally everything that I was looking at as options, I literally got every single one of them in my private window going from LA all the way to Seattle. And it was just a great time. Even got some great sleep and got some a great bed head. I mean, like the best bed head I've ever had. And it was just the sleep and just the rest and the reflecting.
We didn't need to see that, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. You can't unsee that either. So all I have to say, I would definitely encourage something like this where you can just get away for 2 days, build it into the rhythm of what you do. Literally, as I shared this, there's other posts on my social about the food and the car and what it looks like and all that type of stuff. And oh man, so many people have reached out and says, I'm going to do something like this. Give me some details on that. So if you have questions around that, I can definitely help around that. But whatever it is, we want you to make sure that you're working on yourself personally just as much as you do publicly. What we gain privately is what comes out publicly. So practical recommendation, what we would give you is a book called From Strength to Strength. If you have not read that, this is probably now one of my top 10 books. And it's something that Lee and I have just been literally recommending it to everybody. It really does talk about what does our life look like beyond everything else? Like our shelf life is actually a lot shorter than we actually think. And what is it to be able to get ahead of that? And so this is a book that we'd recommend. If you want to just start out with even Andy Stanley's podcast with Arthur Brooks, that will give you a 30-40 minute teaser of the book and, let you know if you want to lead into the book or not. So we wanted to let you know about that resource and think that would be a great one. All right, Lee.
One of the things that's great about this is not all of us can get on a train in the next few weeks and do that. But I think what we wanted you to see, and Kay did it so well, is the principle behind that, right? Of like, we all have had, I believe most of us on this call have had conversations probably in the last 9 to 12 months with people in ministry, perhaps people that you got into ministry with, or you were doing ministry with, they were on your team, or they were people that you looked to, and they were tapping out. I just saw another guy yesterday on Instagram who many of you would know, who was leading some ministry that's like, I'm tapping out for health reasons, etc. I don't know the backstory of all of that, and sometimes that's the best move. But I think sometimes if we dig in deep, it's us sitting on these calls, nodding, maybe being a little bit jealous of Kay, and then going back to the grind right afterwards and not building in. And you don't have to get on a train for 2 days. Maybe you need to do that occasionally. But it's how are we building in? And part of what we want to do on these calls is remind you of things you already know. Everybody on this call knows that they should be doing these regular breaks that create margin for you to pray, think, in that. But maybe even as you look at the rest of the year, this last quarter, last 90 days, it might be worth pulling your calendar out post-call and looking for a window that you're going to actually designate, because some of you are vets on here, and I bet if you unmuted, you would tell us it's not going to happen by accident. And Kay's funny because he didn't tell you, like, he's going back and forth with me for like 4 days. Like, I don't know, should I do it? I don't know. And then finally I get the text, like, I pulled the trigger, right? And it's like, that's kind of how we all are a lot of times with what we know would be healthy. It's really hard for us to pull the trigger, and we can talk ourselves out of it. Why? Because as we're going to talk about here in a minute, the work in it is always pulling at us. And when we take the time to work on it, the work in it isn't getting done. But I'm telling you, if we'll do the personal work on it, the work in it we're going to be more effective as we work in it. All right. So any thoughts? Unmute. I'll give you 30 seconds on that before we move on. If you want that podcast, Kay will drop it in the chat too. The Andy podcast that's there. It's probably the best summary for you to listen to. It's only 30 minutes for you to get a sense of what's going on. Any other thoughts on that from you guys listening today? Tips, thoughts? Don't all talk at once. Awesome. Okay. So part 2 of today is really where I just want to pause, and I have like 5 minutes and then I'm going to roll to Mark. Is probably a lot of you saw on social some of the posts that I put up, because the whole world needs to know everything that's going on in our lives, right? Around the situation that we had here at the church that I get to serve at here in Vegas. Couple of weeks ago. The irony of it is that it happened a week after the Hurricane Hillary was going to roll through. It rolled through San Diego and LA, and there was, minimal effect of that. And here in Vegas, they had said it was going to come, and we kind of prepped a little bit the only way Vegas can, like, what do we do, right? Rain. And then the weird part is it became sort of a non-event, but then the following Saturday that I'm going to talk to you guys about, unexpectedly, we just got hammered. So just to give you a little timeline of the events that I put on here, is that picture it's about 4:00 on a Saturday afternoon. Everything for Sunday and our services here at our Windmill location has already been in place, rehearsals, all that stuff. Everything's set. I mean, literally, there's no one on campus. Everything's like prep for tomorrow kind of a thing. At about 4:00 on that Saturday, one of our 15-year-old security kids is walking through the building, emptying trash, and he walks through the building. And the next slide is kind of what he walked into. So, okay, you can go to the next slide and I'll just keep going with the timeline. But he basically just walked into like water in our backstage area that was coming through the roof. And then there's the video. So as he's about to open the door to actually access our onstage area, you'll get a glimpse, if you haven't seen this, of what was going on at the moment on a Saturday at 4 o'clock. If you look real close at the video right there, there's two racks that look pretty discreet. Those are actually probably about $500,000 in network gear, wireless gear, LED wall controllers, all of that stuff that's located right there. And luckily, the rain decided that it would just fall right on top of that rack, and the rain would just come in on top of that rack and basically destroy that. And so by 4:15, our production team, what was left of them, had come in and had started to sort of assess the damage. And so them assessing the damage led to a call to me about 100 miles away. You can go to the next slide, Kay, if you want, or go back one so we don't have to keep watching the tragedy happen in front of us. But they called me and they said, hey, we've got a situation. We're going to send you some video of it. And so we then went through from about 4:30 till about 6 o'clock, a series of moves that I just want to kind of give you a quick dissection of. As I'm about 100 miles out of town coming back to Vegas, our main production guy who's in charge of everything had taken the Labor Day weekend and was in Phoenix. And then we had boots on the ground backstage doing what they were doing, right? And so everything that I've got on the screen in front of you right now, guys, is actually obviously post-mortem, right? So it's me, because I'm weird, sorry, I have a disease, a few days after, kind of going, okay, what do we learn from this? What are the work on it sort of learnings that we can have in the middle of it? As far as what went on. So let me walk you through a few of them. So I've got 4 or 5 here. So number one is, you guys know this, but under pressure, priorities and perspective are invaluable, right? In that I'm getting a call from our team, mostly younger warrior types, who are just like screaming on the phone. They are doing a great job at actually dealing with the situation, but they're wrestling with fast forwarding to what does tomorrow look like while the rain's still pouring into the building. And so part of where I had to coach them as someone, and when you read Strength to Strength, the resource Kay just gave you, it talks a little bit about this idea of fluid knowledge or fluid wisdom versus crystallized wisdom. And so basically I was operating in that experienced crystallized wisdom lane, and they were operating in the fluid, like, we're young, we're getting it, we want to tackle the world thing. And I'm going, can you guys just stop the water from flowing before we talk about how we're going to have sound for 24 hours or 12 hours from now? And so it was really the sense as a leader of trying to get them focusing on the primary issue and doing some reflective action. All right. And so this involved like blow dryers, pulling gear out, mops, buckets, trying to dry off electronic equipment. Unfortunately, not much was saved. Number two is, don't underestimate the power of a pause. So our pause was built in because I was in this crazy situation, sort of the primary decision maker. I told them we weren't going to make any decisions for the next 90 minutes until I was on the ground. And that inadvertently created a great pause for us to be able to deal with the issue, and then also assess the possibilities and the opportunities that the disaster allowed, right? So we had a built-in pause because I wasn't there. But I would say, as you guys are dealing with disasters, maybe not of this level, but going, okay, where's the opportunity for pause to come in so that we can kind of, as we say, work on it, get above it, and figure out what's the best thing. This third one I want you to see is, beware the fix that has the potential to be fatal. What I mean by that is, they were screaming at me, we need to rent gear, we need to rent gear. And I said, great, what gear do we need to rent? And they said, we have no idea, but we know the rental place closes in 15 minutes. And I said, that doesn't make a lot of sense to rent a bunch of stuff we don't even know we need, right? And unfortunately, as we learned later on, renting stuff at that moment would not have been helpful, because it wouldn't have been compatible with all the different components of our system. And so we would have done something that would have cost more money and more manpower. And unfortunately, it would have probably been fatal to team health and team capacity at the same time. Number 4, urgency is the birthplace of unintended consequences, right? So you guys have all been through this kind of stuff. I'm preaching to the choir here, but sometimes when everything seems urgent, we make decisions and then there's unintended consequences. Most of you guys on this call and gals on this call are decision makers at a level that you're dealing with people that maybe will get lost in the urgency. So we would just encourage you to make sure that you're here, strength to strength, right? Crystallize knowledge. Looking at the situation. The last one I'll put here is listening is essential in the moments that seem to demand loud leadership. What I mean by that is everybody gets loud, almost like literally loud, but also just like a lot of voices, a lot of intensity. And so one of the things that we as seasoned leaders can develop is the idea of how do I listen in the midst of all the chaos and the loudness that's going on? The picture on the screen is a text I sent to Jordan at 6:06. And he was our worship leader the next day. And you can see, I actually didn't read it. I hope I didn't use any bad words. You can see that I text him and I said, hey, we've got a situation. We may have some things tomorrow. We're not sure what's going on. And you can see what he put at the bottom. He said, just put me in the middle of the room with no audio system. I don't need any of that stuff. And I think he was sort of joking or just sort of trying to be, calm at that moment. But I read the text. I sat there for a few minutes, pulled a couple of people over, and I said, I think his text is actually our answer. And so what that caused was us to then pause all of the chaos of saying, we're going to have to work the next 12 hours to get everything working, and just saying, we're going to stop. We're going to deal with the wet issue. We're going to clear the stage. And we're literally just going to put him out there and we're going to acknowledge where we are. And it's going to lower all the pressure and all the intensity of everything. So the next slide sort of shows him up there kind of doing his thing. And we were out of there by 8 o'clock because we had nothing else to do. And so we just put him on stage the next day and just had him do his thing with his acoustic guitar. Obviously, he had the ability to do that. And so it just created a moment where for our people who are not intensely worshipful, they actually were more engaged than they've ever been. And then you get the response that all of you have got when you do something different. We need to do this all the time, right? Which means we should never do this again because you say we should do it all the time. But I only tell you that to tell you this last thing before I throw to Mark, and that is this, is that your preemptive work on culture or lack thereof will reveal itself fully in the moments of greatest pressure, right? So as Brian and Joel and guys are working, some of you are new in different cultures, our culture was reflected, and I'm giving you a postmortem, but I want you to know the good parts of our culture came out and the parts of our culture we still need to work on also revealed itself, right? So let me give you one and then I'm done. The culture here that says we're going to go as hard as we can and we're going to make it happen and nothing's going to stop us and we're going to climb 50-foot walls and we're going to work all night. That's part of our culture. And generally, that's a good thing. That culture actually was working against us in the middle of this disaster because all of our guys were willing to do that and it would have been completely the wrong thing. And so just be aware that your culture that you're building can be both a positive and a negative thing, but it'll be revealed in the moments of greatest pressure. So part of that is what kind of culture are we working on in these moments? All right. And so before I throw to Mark, any feedback or questions on that? I went through it pretty quick, but
I actually have a huge question, Lee, and that is how much do you
Mark,
include?
you're not allowed to talk yet. No, it's not your turn. Okay.
How much do you include Shane on this? How much do you go ahead and solve it yourself with the team?
Pretty much, if we're using K's, what is it, K? Inform, consult, RACI.
Yeah.
In this case, it's really more informing.
Oh, okay.
Right? In the sense of like, hey, here's what's up, status, update, here's what's up. And then finally like, hey, this is the decision and why we've made the decision.
Yeah.
I am very aware though, Mark, of in my mind, I'm like, he's mentally going to want to know the why, right? So me saying to him, the only thing we could do was put Jordan, or the easiest thing to do was to put Jordan up there would not have flown.
Yeah.
Makes sense? So I didn't approach it with the easiest thing. I said the right thing to do is to put Jordan up there because here's what would have happened otherwise. It's a little bit of semantics, but he probably would have pushed back a little if I would have just said, it's easy, we don't want to deal with it, versus going, This is going to be awesome.
Right.
Great question. Anybody else? By the way, it took us 4 days to get all the rental gear and pull everything back together. And there's a gap of about an inch all along our roof rib that runs all the way down. That's literally like daylight coming through. So that's where all the water was coming in from the edge of the building. So that's fun. I hope that's helpful for you guys. I hope you never have to deal with that level of it. But I think the word disaster is probably extreme. But when you're dealing with staffing, when you're dealing with pressure sort of situations, I think some of these lessons that we learned is probably could be helpful for you guys. Because not all the leaders around you are going to respond that way. So you as the primary probably need to be able to do that. All right. All right. Okay. You want to introduce Mark Lee?
Sure. Yeah. Mark is at Vantage Point. He is the lead pastor there, but he's also part of the Send Network, if you're familiar with the Send Network. And you can share with him a little bit about what you do there, but he is a friend of Growmentum, Lee, and my friend. He has more connections with the marathon thing with Lee than it does with me, that's for sure. But he's an incredible guy. He will be at Think Tank Live as well, but I can't wait for him to for you guys to meet him and for him to share today. So Mark, take it over.
Yeah, Lee's trophy case is cute. You know, it's cute. I appreciate those couple medals that you have, Lee. So that's good. Hey, so cool to be here with you guys. And I would just start out by saying thank you guys so much. I would say that there are probably no two greater people that I know that are wise, strategic, kingdom-minded as both Kay and Lee. And they both have Korean names. So I think that's pretty cool too. And I just relish any time that I can get with these guys. I would say this, I think Lee spoke to this, but even today, I may not necessarily even say anything that you guys have never heard. It'll probably be a good reminder of things that you already know. But this is a message that at Vantage Point, we're constantly trying to push onto the staff. And we're constantly trying to have the staff push down on their volunteers. And so please make sure that it makes its way down the organization. But a little bit about myself. In 1999, I was actually working as a civil engineer. Okay. Had my bachelor's, my master's in civil engineering. I was working as an engineer, but I kind of felt like maybe God was calling me into the ministry. So I quit my job. My wife and I, we moved out to California, all the way from Indiana. No turning back at that point. Started going to Talbot Theological Seminary, where I started learning some very cool, super useful things like the Greek and Hebrew language. Things like bipartite and tripartite. I can't even say it anymore. Hermeneutics and exegesis. And here's an assumption that we all make about pastoring. And that is, especially way back when, if I know a lot of stuff, then I'll become a great pastor. You know, here's another example of that if the youth pastor preaches a great sermon, people come up to him and they don't just say, good job. They say, when are you going to start your own church? Or when are you going to have your own church? Okay. Now, believe it or not, parents do this with their kids all the time. If our kid loves to cook, then they say, hey, I should own my own restaurant. That if your kid my daughter loves to bake, she says this all the time, I should start my own bakery. A kid loves to take pictures. They say, I should start my own photography company. That sounds great. But the problem is that is awful advice. And I think we all understand that there's a totally different set of skills that's required in actually doing something than in leading something, right? Here's the way that we see it play out in ministry all the time. The guy can preach, he should have his own church. The person is good with kids, they should lead a classroom. The guy can ush, so he should be the head of the ushers. And the problem is that it's simply just not true. Here's a fatal assumption. This is the first slide. here's the fatal assumption that we all make, that if someone is good at the work of the ministry, our assumption is that it actually qualifies them to run a ministry that does that kind of work. And it's just not true. Next slide. And that's because here's the problem right here. The problem is that when the going gets tough, the tough get doing. Okay. I would say this, that your single greatest asset is the fact that you are really, really good at what it is that you do. I would also go ahead and say this, that your single greatest liability is not that you suck at ministry or that you aren't administrative and you need to shore up some of your weaknesses or that you aren't a good enough preacher. That's what the inner voice wants to tell us at times. I would say this, that your single greatest liability can be the same thing, that you are really, really good at what you do. And there's a famous scene from Band of Brothers. Private Winters has made his way up to, I don't know, Major Winters. I mean, he's gone up the ranks. They're right about to fight the battle at Bastogne. His leader is messing everything up. His men are dying out on the field. He wants to jump back out onto the field because that's what he does best. That's how he got promoted to begin with. And that's when the guy above him stops him from going out on the battlefield, grabs him by the scruff of his collar and says, your job is not to fight anymore. And so kind of relaying this over to a Vantage Point situation, this is a high growth time for us. This is probably the highest growth gap that we've ever had in the life of our church. Praise the Lord. And Kay has been instrumental in coming in, helping us kind of work through even all of this so that we can work on it instead of just working in it. But along with a very, very high growth time, this is the time where team members start to drown underneath the weight of the ministry. This is where pastors start to drown underneath the weight of their own. I mean, the dream now becomes a nightmare. So here's a slide that I'd love for you to see. It's a leadership parable, and it happens in children's ministry all the time. See the young woman teach Sunday school. See the young woman lead the children's ministry. See the young woman become an old woman. Why? Because what got her here isn't necessarily going to get her there, right? Michael Gerber says this in the book, The E-Myth. If your business, we can call this the ministry. If your ministry depends on you, then you don't own a business, you have a job. And it's the worst job in the world because you are working for a lunatic. And who is that lunatic? It's me. And that lunatic is you, especially if you are the senior pastor. Man, you have no one to blame but yourself at that point. If you are an associate pastor, last time I heard, we're all responsible for our own actions. So even for us, we can blame somebody, but the person that we should blame at the end of the day is that sometimes our blessing becomes our curse. I just share a quick verse with you guys so that you don't think that I'm a false teacher. Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 through 12. Y'all have heard it, but let me give you another tint to it that it's a theory, it's an idea, and I could totally be wrong. It says this: so Christ himself gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, pastors, teachers. Why? We've all heard it. To equip his people, not so that we could do it, but to equip his people for the works of service so that the body of Christ may be built up. Ephesus, third largest city in the Roman Empire. Didn't know that. Paul planted the Ephesian church on a second missionary journey. He stayed there for 3 years. That is the longest amount of time that the Apostle Paul stayed at any of his church plants. Now, here's a theory that I have, and it could totally be wrong. Okay. Paul raised up Priscilla and Aquila to take over the church of Ephesus. Priscilla and Aquila raised up Apollos to take over the Ephesian church, but Apollos did not raise up his own successor. The Apostle Paul came back into the mix in order to get Timothy to then take over the Ephesian church. And I wonder to myself, how is it that Apollos didn't raise up his successor, just like the succession, like the legacy of the Ephesian church had always been, that the person in charge would then empower the next person and then empower the next person. I wonder if it's because Apollos was a really, really gifted teacher. We know this. And I wonder if he spent more time, I don't know, working in the ministry more than he worked on the ministry, so that his legacy was that Paul actually had to come and raise up the very person that he could not. Verse 12, it says this, to equip his people for the works of service, so that the body of Christ may be built up. I don't know if you've ever read Michael Fletcher's book, Empowering Leadership. If you haven't, you have to go over it with your staff, because it's such a wonderful book. His chapter on shoulder tapping is the best chapter that I've ever read on not just recruiting volunteers, but discovering volunteers. And it makes a case for why we should never make an announcement for volunteers again.
What was the name of the book, Mark? We'll drop it in the chat.
It's called Empowering Leadership by Michael Fletcher. He says this, that the old paradigm of ministry is that we used to use people to build the church, but the biblical paradigm is that we are using the church in order to build people. That the church is not the end, that the people are the end, and that the ministry that we accomplish is actually simply the vehicle and the pathway to help disciple our people, to help them become what it is that we want them to become. Wayne Cordero, our staff members, our volunteers say this all the time, but it's just a lot easier if I just work in the ministry and I just change diapers instead of going out and discipling other people or discovering other volunteers. Wayne Cordero says this, I've tasked my staff with making sure that they memorize this line. He said this, I will never apologize for asking someone to give their life to the only thing that will count for eternity. Okay. In other words, here's what we're saying, that God did not give you this job so that you could do the job. God gave you this job so that you could work your way out of a job, because when you work your way out of a job, what's going to happen is that other people will finally begin to experience the joy of ministry, begin to experience the joy of sacrifice and serving, which is the same reason why we fell in love with ministry to begin with, right? There's a critical difference between we as staff and the volunteer, which is staff wants to develop people. Next slide. Staff wants to develop people. Volunteer wants to do it all by himself. I may have skipped the first one. Staff wants to develop people. Volunteer wants to do it all by themselves. The staff, we want to build systems. The volunteer or the staff member who shouldn't be a staff member just wants to survive the weekend, right? Staff, our mentality is that we want to build a ministry that works without us. The volunteer is the person who builds a ministry that works because of them. And so here's some critical questions that I'm always working through with staff, in particular with newer staff. So for example, whenever we have newer staff come on board, onboarding is something that's super important to me, just because I want to be able to do it myself. I want to be able to orient them to the values of our staff. We have 5 staff values. We read 5 different books that reflect those 5 different staff values. And I want them to get that from me. I don't want to delegate that to my executive pastor. I don't want to delegate that to anybody else. Also, I just want my staff to know that I'll always be here for them and that I do want to be their pastor. So here's the question that I always work through, in particular with newer staff. How can I get my ministry to work without me, right? How can I get my people to work and without my constant interference? How can I lead a ministry and not have it be the very thing that I feel imprisoned by? How do I spend my time doing the work that I love rather than doing the work that I have to do? See, Here's what I think is super important. The problem isn't the ministry. For all those there, I'm not going to say for all the people who have church hurt, but for some of the people who have church hurt, the problem may not have totally have been the ministry. The problem was the person who handled the ministry. And until we change the person who's handling the ministry, the problem is always going to exist, right? So here's the first thing that I think needs to happen before, here's the first thing that I think needs to happen, that we have to grow as a leader, okay? That has to be one of the most important things on our agenda. That I don't even know who said this, but I love it. In order to conquer the world, you must first conquer the most difficult person in the entire world to lead. And who is that? That person is me. I want to eat whenever I want to eat. I want to drink whenever I want to drink. I want to do whatever I want to do. And I just, last that I heard, that's called immaturity, and I need to grow in those areas of my life. Okay, I have a little, I have a little graph here. This isn't going to come over well. It ain't going to come over well. Okay, but I have a little graph here that I want you to see. Can you see that, or should I just skip this? Can you see that?
Mark, take a picture of it and send it to Kay and I, and we'll drop it in.
Okay.
But keep talking while you take the picture.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do two things at once. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Here is impact. Okay. Here is time. Here is the growth of our staff. Here is the growth of our church. Does that make sense? The goal is for the trajectory of that staff person's growth to always be exceeding the growth of the church. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? That is the goal. That whatever the growth of the church is doing, we have to make sure that the staff is growing at a greater trajectory than the church than the church is growing. And that delta right there is called a kingdom mentality. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If the staff is outgrowing the church and that person wants to go to some other church, feels called to be a part of some other ministry because they feel like they can make a greater kingdom impact, I need to release them and I need to be happy for them and make sure that happens, because you know what? It's all about the kingdom and it's not about Vantage Point Church. Are you guys following me? You guys following me? Okay, good.
We're following. Yeah,
Okay.
we're kind of going crap is what we're doing.
Yeah, okay, because I'm going to reverse this now. If the trajectory of the church is growing at a greater trajectory than the staff, that happens, right? This delta right here means that something's got to give with this staff member. That staff member has to be reorged. That staff member has to be transitioned. Something has to happen with that staff member, because or they just have to grow, just because it's not about the church at that point. It's about the kingdom. Here's the worst staff member right here, and that is this. Some people have 20 years worth of experience, and some staff members have 1 year worth of experience that's redone 20 years of their life. Okay, practice does not always make perfect. And so some people, here's what I'm trying to say, that some people on staff get better and better and better and better. And that's what we need to be. That's what we need to be coaching our staff people to be. Some people, the best you can say about them is that they're just not bad enough to fire, right? And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that we as leaders are growing and growing and growing, and that we're not just repeating the same experience 20 times. So number one, kudos for being on this call.
Mark, you need to stop for just a second.
Yeah.
Like, this is big. Like, I do mean to interrupt you, but I apologize. Okay, guys, what do we got? Somebody, because you're going to blow through this, Mark, and it's like what you just did is worth the whole last 60 minutes. So And maybe it's just me, but somebody on the call want to respond to Mark or kudos or anything on that really fancy chart that he held up?
Yeah, Mark, man, I just want to say I appreciate the rawness, the realness to this, because I feel like everybody has been in this tension point at some point of going like, these are great staff members. They've loved the church. They've been a part of the community. Everybody knows X, Y, and Z, and they know their job X, Y, and Z, and I don't have to worry about it. But when you put it in perspective like that, like this is just about kingdom. Like it takes so much pressure off of the decision. It's like the church is growing in this way. The staff member is maybe growing in this way. It makes the decision just so much easier and lighter. But I guess the tension is how do you still deal with those emotions and the feelings behind that decision that needs to be made?
Or do you lessen, just to jump in on Joe or Mark, do you pay attention to that gap? And is there a way to actually coach that gap, lessen that gap, or reverse that? Or is the gap just continue to get bigger?
Well, I mean, it depends on the staff person. The number one thing that I think we can do is pre-teach this so they have it in their heads beforehand. Because it's the whole idea of we're all around the same campfire right now, but we may not necessarily be around the same campfire forever. So how do we coach that gap too? I think it's super important. This is something that I do, and this is something that I want all of our staff members to do. I want them to be on a once a month coaching call with somebody that they respect. And here's what I want them to do. Not the same person every month. I don't want them to ask them to be their mentor, because that's like asking somebody to marry you on the first date. That what I want them to do is get on a coaching call once a month. Here's what I do. I always pre-submit my questions. I ask for a 30-minute coaching call. I'll always get an hour. Not always, but I'll usually get more than 30 minutes. I'll always say, hey, let me honor your time. 30 minutes is up. Oftentimes they go, no, we can go further. I pre-submit my questions. I will keep chit chat to a minimum. I'll ask those questions. I'll oftentimes even follow up the email with 3 action points on my part. And what I'll always do is I'll send that pastor's wife a $50 gift card to their favorite place and a thank you note. So it's never about the first meeting, it's about the second meeting. And so that's one of the things that I encourage all my staff to do. We do something called benchmarking too. We've done this with the Crossing. I'm not a big fan of conferences, just because like the big conferences are a lot of inspiration. But oftentimes what our staff will do is we will benchmark with another church that we aspire to be like. We did this at the Crossing. We joined their all staff meeting. Then everybody just kind of splits up with their counterparts and spends a couple hours with them. Again, asking the pre-thought about questions that were submitted weeks before. All staff members come with a thank you card and a gift card. And so those are the things that we do. But how do I begin to take the emotion out of it? This is something that we're going to start implementing soon. But there has to be a system of yellow lights before you ever get to a red light. So those system of yellow lights can be one-on-ones, can be reviews that need to be logged. But I think one of the things that we're going to start doing soon is once your volunteer percentage begins to fall below a certain threshold, then your volunteer recruitment then becomes, you go into a different mode. You shift into a different gear. And so you have to report that every time you meet with your supervisor at that point. So they kind of know even that I'm on notice a little bit. So that at least begins the conversation. And as long as there's some subsequent conversations before you get to that final, like, hey, man, this is just, that person feels the weight of the ministry. And by the time you have the conversation of, you know what, man, how are you feeling? Oftentimes they're like, man, I'm just drowning. I'm stressed. I'm really starting to resent the ministry. And when you begin to talk about transition, it almost relieves them.
Hey, Mark, quick question. This is so good. Great stuff. If you mentioned earlier, you have 5 books that you read through together as a staff, especially when you're onboarding. Can you either throw the names of those books into the chat or just hit those real quick?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're specific to our staff values, but totally,
Okay.
I would love to.
Yeah, you can rattle them if you want, Mark, and we'll just throw them in if you can remember them.
They are you put me
Sorry,
on the
bro.
spot.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
we could actually put
We'll
it
do it in
the
the
follow-up
follow-up email.
email. But I think the value there of what you're talking about, Mark, is that align it with your staff values,
Yeah,
right? Because
yeah.
you might have different values than others, right? So what are the resources that you would really be able to reinforce those values and stuff too?
Yeah.
Mark, I know you have like 1 or 2 more points, and so maybe you can finish and then we can open up the Q&A.
Sure. My second point is just that I wanted to give a devotion or a talk that really was true to Growmentum, and that is the fact that you have to work on the ministry and not just in the ministry, right? Here's what I think is the most important. I think Kay spoke to how it is that that's done, and we all have different ways that that's going to get done. I think one of the most critical things that we have to figure out is, when is it going to happen? Okay, so let me tell you what was a game changer in my prayer life. I always intended to pray, even as a pastor, if I can be honest, always intended to pray, great intentions. If I have to be honest, up until relatively recently, especially in the beginning years of church planting, man, I lived a ridiculously prayerless life. And I think the game changer for me was just figuring out not even how to pray, but just when I was going to pray, scheduling it in. And so I do what my wife calls praying the offices. I pray in the morning, I pray in the afternoon, I pray in the evening, and I have times where that's specifically going to happen. So I have to understand exactly when I'm going to work on it. So I'm going to do that in the beginning of my week, where literally on Tuesday morning, here's the first thing that's going to happen at my week. I'm going to sit down at the same place at the same time with a pad of paper, and I'm going to say, "Speak, Lord, your servant is listening." That's it. And what Kay did was just so instrumental, just because change of pace plus change of place oftentimes equals a change of perspective. And that's what I want to do. I want to change my pace. I want to change my place. And I just want God to speak to me. I have a different way of saying what working on the ministry is called. I think it can just be called prayer, honestly. That what I want to do is I want to sit in the Lord's presence. If you want your ministry to grow, if you want your leadership to grow, I've got to spend time praying and inviting God in a posture of solitude and silence into the process of evaluation and feedback. And what I want to do is, before I ask anybody else what their opinion on the ministry is, I want to get alone with God, and I want to ask him what his opinion is on if what I'm doing, first of all, is pleasing to him. So I do that in the beginning of the week. The beginning of every day, what I'll do is I will walk around my building before I start. I don't walk around it 7 times because the building might collapse, but I walk around the building and I just do the same thing. Here are a couple of things that I do. I'll just rattle through them real quick. I review my goals for the year. Zig Ziglar calls this the wheel of life. What are my ministry goals? What are my physical goals? What are my spiritual goals? What are my marriage and family goals? What are my financial goals? How do I retire when I'm 65? Am I on target with that? Am I not on target with that? Do I have a target with that? What are my vocational goals? For me, I evaluate not only Sunday, but I evaluate my preaching by watching my own sermon. That's like listening to yourself on the answering machine for 30 minutes. It's the worst experience in the world. But I think this goes to what somebody else was saying. I begin to ask God to speak to me about my team members, and then I'll just stop here. I just went on a 2-month sabbatical, and one of the things that I asked just mentor figures in my life is, as I go into the second half of my ministry career, tell me a mistake that I need to stay away from. And somebody gave me a devastating piece of advice that I really want to make sure that I take to heart. And this person said that the older the senior pastor gets, the more loyal he gets towards people who have walked with them a long time, but who aren't performing the way that they should perform. And I just thought that is freaking devastating. What do I care more about? Do I care more about the kingdom? Do I care? What is it that I want at the end of the day? I'll leave you with this idea. I've heard this quote before and I love it. Give a level 5 team level 10 resources, and what you will get are level 5 results. Okay. But give a level 10 team just a microphone, stand up on stage with nothing else, and what you're going to get is you give a level 10 team level 5 resources and you'll still get level 10 results. Okay, that's all I got.
Just a little bit. It's just a small amount of information. Oh my gosh. I think I need a sabbatical after that. We just to be loyal to the time that we had with everybody, right? To make sure that we're good on the time. I just want to first of all say thanks. I don't let Kay wrap us up, but Mark, thank you. Seriously, dude. Like, I know we pressed you, but I think that's actually kind of cool. Like, just to give you a limited time, just to give us the heart of it. I know that there's probably lots of questions and things. What do they call that? Shameless plug. Some of you still could get to Vegas. I think we have like 5 or 6 spots left. And so if you're like, dang, I wasn't going to go, but now Mark's going to be there. We actually are going to have Mark wrap up our time together because we love Mark's heart, and he's going to wrap us up and lead us through some communion and some self-reflection as well as a part of our content day. So if I know it's a few weeks away and some of you are like, yeah, I've got other things, but maybe it is the time you need to come and work on it a little bit. And so again, shameless plug, there's still some spots for you if you want to be part of it. And Mark, just so great. So Kay, I'll let you wrap it up and then we'll stop the recording and you guys can head on your days.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mark. Literally, you guys will get all of the deck, and there's some great talking points. Mark started out saying, take this down, to your organization and to the direct reports. And because your lead team, your executive team, your campus leads, all those people really need this to be able to drive this down to the organization. And I think there's going to be tons of value that you'll get out of that too. And, again, Mark will be there at the Think Tank Live that you can, he's got a lot of ideas, as you can see, around these things that make all these principles really practical. And so I'm sure he'd be available to be able to talk through all of those things too. So thanks so much for being on the call, and we'll send you guys out this resource. Feel free to share it with your team and with different people. We'll see you in Vegas.
Thanks, guys.